Everybody. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world. Welcome to today's virtual experience exchange session on Caribbean NDC revision. Where are we? Where are we in the preparation of revised NDCs that are due this year? Where are we in terms of ambition and planning for implementation? And what can we learn from each other? What support are countries looking for and what is available to them? And what do the NDCs mean from an economic point of view? What can business, investors, and others whose action will play an important role when it comes to the implementation of NDCs, what can they expect? And where are their points of entry? These are some of the questions we will be discussing over the next 100 minutes or so. My name is Lena Vokek. I've been working with the NDCFI as an independent consultant funded by GIZ pretty much since its inception some 2 years ago. I have the pleasure of being the moderator for today's session and have the honor to introduce today's panel. Here you go. So there you go. Here we are. We have 3 countries. We have Christopher Joseph, Energy Officer of the Government of Grenada, Omar Alcock, Senior Technical Officer for Mitigation of the Government of Jamaica, Shana Emmanuel, Sustainable Development and Environment Officer of the Government of St. Lucia. We also have 5 representatives of partner organizations that are working with Caribbean countries and the OECS Commission on various aspects of NDC revision and implementation. We have Maya Murisic, Environmental Specialist at the World Bank. We have Kristen Deason, Caribbean Representative of the Global Green Growth Institute. We have Francis Fuller, Deputy Director, New York, and Implementation Specialist at Climate Analytics. James Venner, who is a Technical Climate Change Specialist at UNDP. Ventura Silva, lead of the Unf Triple C Regional Collaboration Center for Latin America and the Caribbean. And Jakob Waslander, Senior Associate at the NDC Partnership at the World Resources Institute. We also have with us representatives from 2 sectors that feature prominently in most, if not all, of the region's NDCs. Ignatius Jean, Executive Director of the Caribbean Water and Sewage Association, and John Maxwell Jack, Regional Energy Manager at Wiltec Energy. Welcome all, and a very big thank you for joining us for today's session. Let me walk you very briefly through what we are planning to do today. Just now, I will be handing over to the NDC Finance Initiative and Annette Leo of the Government of St. Lucia, who's one of the 2, I guess, key lead figures in the NDCFI, to provide some welcome remarks. And we'll also be having some welcome remarks from the other partners who've been involved in the setting up of this webinar, the NDC Partnership, Unf Triple C, and the World Bank. We'll then move on to a country panel where 3 countries in the region will share their experiences on where they are so far with regards to the NDC. Jamaica, who've already submitted their NDC, congratulations on that. Grenada and St. Lucia, whose NDCs are in progress. During the country panel discussion, we'll hopefully have some time to take some of your questions from the floor, either during the panel or afterwards in more of a separate discussion, depending on what's coming in and how it fits in. So please do start putting in your questions. Please note though that there is a chat function as well as a questions function. So please make sure that you actually type your questions into the Q&A so that we can make sure that nothing gets lost. We will then have the partners come on with their reactions and comments to what they're hearing from the countries and some of their experiences in the collaborations that they've had with the countries. And we'll have the opportunity to have a bit more of a detailed introduction to what the World Bank is planning in the region with its NDC deep dive. We'll then move to the inputs from Ignatius Jean and John Maxwell-Jack from the water and energy sectors, and hopefully again have some time for some discussion with the audience and back to the countries and other panelists as well. And then hope to close promptly at 11:45 St. Lucia time. And with that, may I hand over to you, Annette, for your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Lena. Good morning, colleagues. Welcome, and thank you for joining what I believe is actually our third virtual event being hosted by the NDCFI, obviously in collaboration with the NDCP and other partners. Colleagues, because of the difficulties that we've been having as a result of COVID-19 in convening our second NDCFI forum, which was supposed to have been in May, we believe that it is important for us to continue to try as much as possible to maintain focus on our mandate by ensuring support to OECS member states and other Unf Triple C member parties as far as possible for the implementation of their NDCs. So in as much as we are not able to give the type of support that is most needed, especially in terms of financing, we believe that the technical peer support, the advice, and constant dialogue is very important. Equally important, I believe, is the presence and support of our partners who have committed to supporting this initiative and other countries, and some of them are here with us today, and we're very grateful to them for taking the time out and to maintain and for maintaining their commitment to the NDCFI. Last year, the NDCFI, as one of its initiatives, carried out an assessment across OECS member states on the status of their NDCs and what their plans are in terms of revision. And as Lena indicated today, we want to have a conversation about where we are, especially as at the moment we're carrying out our revisions under very trying circumstances. And this requires greater commitment and creativity in managing the entire process in working with our partners, our colleague member states, and other support entities. So at the moment, we're looking forward to hearing from the countries in terms of what has been going on, how creative they have been in hearing from our partners in terms of ascertaining how they see the process unfolding, what their support has been like to member states, and just to understand and to move forward in terms of working together, continuing to work together under the trying circumstances, support each other as much as possible, and to ensure that countries are able to follow the steps of Jamaica in terms of ensuring that we're able to successfully deliver meaningful, enhanced NDC. So I look forward to this session, and again, thank you for joining us. Back to you, Lena.
Thank you, Annette. You've already mentioned the NDC partnership. Jakob, may I invite you for the next opening remarks, please?
Yes, thank you, Lena. And it's really a pleasure and honor to be with you at this important meeting on behalf of the NDC partnership. And it's also good to acknowledge that 7 of our Caribbean members are present front and center in this meeting: Antigua and Barbuda, Belize, Dominican Republic, Grenada, Jamaica, St. Lucia, and Haiti. So it is for us really important to have these kind of gatherings to exchange progress on NDC enhanced ambition and strengthening implementation. And the Caribbean nations are really showing, in our view, important leadership. And I want to highlight 3 topics here. First of all, in all of the countries, we see that the whole of government approach is really front and center. It is not something of one ministry, but of all elements of government and also all layers of government. So the whole public sector. Also civil society, that's the second element, and the business sector are strongly involved. And it's interesting to hear also later this morning about potential for public-private partnerships to engage the private sector in this important work. And the third important element of leadership is about the partnership plans. There are 3 countries in the Caribbean region which have strong and clear partnership plans, which are clearly linked to the climate goals, but also very concrete and therefore implementable and as an instrument for resource mobilization. And that is what we think is essential for the domestic and international partners to focus on, and also for the government as a basis to coordinate and to lead action. Last point is that we as a partnership have engaged in the last 6 months in mobilizing for the Caribbean members $3.8 million to enhance the NDCs, and it's with 16 different partners, and it's for in total 185 activities. That these activities are now being rolled out, and perhaps later on we can come back to it. And the second element is that we have now economic advisors, which will be embedded at country level, and this will start in the upcoming weeks and months, so that you have more expertise available at country level to help you with integrating climate action in all elements, also of stimulus packages in the post-COVID era. So thank you for that. I'm really looking forward to this very interesting conversation. Back to you, Lena.
Thank you very much, Jacob, for your opening remarks, and also for already giving us a bit of a glimpse on some of the support that is out there through the NDC partnership. We look forward to discussing that in a bit more detail later. This discussion, of course, also requires the presence of the Unf Triple C, who has been closely involved with the NDCFI from the beginning. Ventura, the floor is yours for your opening remarks, please.
Thanks, Lena, and a very good morning to all. Thank you for taking time to join this discussion, which we look forward to understanding where different countries are and also the challenges and the opportunities that they had identified. This is the second time around when the Caribbean is developing the NDC. We all submitted INDCs in 2015, which was the foundation for the Paris Agreement. And as Jacob and Annette mentioned in their presentation, in their introductions, it was very interesting to see that the Caribbean is taking lead, setting example for the other countries by developing more ambitious or updating more ambitious NDCs. And it would be interesting for us to see how this process evolves. Most of the countries already started this. Some are still considering the planning stage for the NDC revision. And some, like Jamaica, who are more advanced, are now considering about the implementation of the NDC. So it would be, I think it's a great initiative by OECS, and we are happy to partner and look for a very interesting discussion and to hear from you all on what are your views on this process. Thanks. Back to you, Lena.
Thank you very much, Ventura. May I now ask Maya of the World Bank to give her opening remarks, please?
Sure. Thank you, Lena, and good morning, everyone. Well, it's also a great pleasure for me to be here and welcome you today on behalf of the World Bank. Noting very packed and ambitious agenda that we have, and because today is all about the peer exchange, I will be very brief. I just want to thank all the participants for your effort for joining us today, to wish you a successful event, and to say that the World Bank stands ready to continue supporting you in transforming your national objectives and policies into action on the ground. So thank you again and look forward to the discussions.
Great, thank you, Maria. And we'll of course have an opportunity to hear a bit more from you and the World Bank's work later on as well. Well, great. Thanks everybody for setting us up for today's session. And that brings us to, I think, one of the really most important parts of today's session, namely the peer exchange and the exchange between the countries, and a bit of an update as to where the countries are. As I've said, we have on the panel Jamaica, Grenada, and St. Lucia. And we thought we wouldn't have 3 presentations, but we'd rather try and have each of them take turns in answering some key questions that we feel are important, also for other countries who may be yet earlier in the process of their NDCs, as well as partners and other stakeholders. So maybe Omar, if I can start with you, could you just give us in a few words a bit of an overview of the process for your revision exercise, And could you tell us a little bit about maybe what some of the most innovative features in your revised NDC are, where maybe some of the aspects are that you wish you could have done more work, what has been the biggest challenge, what would you do differently next time? But also and especially, what are some of the most important lessons that you would like to share with others? Omar, let me hand you the mic first, and then we'll pass it on to the other countries for that same set of questions.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Could you just nod to confirm that you can indeed hear me? Nodding, all right, wonderful. Thank you guys. Thank you for inviting us to the event and for giving us the opportunity to share some of the work that we have been able to successfully complete, that being their update of our NDC and submission of same to the Unf Triple C. This process started, I would say, very late 2017. I started working at the Climate Change Division in 2017. And so looking over the functions and the job requirements, I saw that NDC was a part of my list, right? We had very recently submitted our INDC, that was in 2015, and subsequently became party to the Paris Agreement in 2017. And so in reviewing the requirements of the agreement and reviewing what my job functions were, and having been a part of the negotiating process, I saw that NDC was something that had to be on top of the list. So that thought process started for me in 2017. In 2018, we started scouting around to see how best we could actually accomplish delivering on the NDC. And we examined various avenues from independent development partners, consultancies, and we have intensive discussion in-house to see how best it could have been done. In that same year, we also had discussion with the NDC partnership, and through the partnership, indicated to them what some of our needs were and what some of our challenges were. And through that relationship, then became a member in August of that year. We continued that discussion, and we were introduced to a number of development partners, the World Bank being one of them. And in 2019, we I guess you'd say we submitted a proposal to the NDC support facility, and successfully received assistance, technical assistance and financial assistance through that facility to assist with providing assessment and analysis for us to be able to complete the updated report. So our process started, the actual process to do the update started in July 2019, and exactly 1 year later, we were able to submit to the Unf Triple C, thanks to the NDC partnership and thanks to work through the World Bank Group and Vivid Economics as our consultants. As it relates to most innovative features, well, for us, methodology was important, and so we stuck to doing the updated report based on the IPCC methodology. So the sectors that are, the categories and sectors identified in the IPCC methodology, 2006 methodology, was what we had focused on. So energy, industrial product and process use, the AFALU sector, waste, and so on. And so that's how we approached it. I don't know if you want to call it innovative, but I think for us it was the best way to go because it brought credibility to the process. And so based on that, we then did some assessments of what the possible sectors could be that we might include in our NDC. I know some countries have been considering, especially negotiators, it's a big topic now when you go to the sessions, whether or not adaptation should be a part of your NDC. We had taken the decision that it would be a part, but it would not feature as dominantly as some countries expect it to. Because in the long run, what we intend to develop is a NAP, National Adaptation Plan. And so that plan, in essence, would cover most of what it is we look to achieve as it relates to adaptation. So what we focused mainly on was how best we were going to be able to reduce our GHG emission levels. And from that, we then created, I guess this would be where part of the innovation comes in, what were called adaptation co-benefits. In other words, the mitigation options that we intended to apply or to implement, how would that then assist us as it relates to adaptation? And so that's kind of how we approached it to ensure that we not only address the mitigation portion of it, but also the adaptation portion of it. And so adaptation is considered, albeit as it relates to the co-benefit aspect from taking our mitigation actions. And so in terms of the work, what could we have done? I really would have hoped that we could have included more sectors. The first NDC was only predicated on energy, and then we were able, based on our assessment, to also include land use change and forestry. But I was also hoping that we might have been able to include some aspects of agriculture and waste on a quantifiable level. It is mentioned and included in the NDC, but just based on a descriptive level. So just describing what are some of the initiatives that were taken there. But energy and forestry were actually done on based on quantification. So we actually did modeling and analysis, robust modeling analysis based on LEAP and other modeling tools to find out what it is that we could achieve based on those two sectors. As it relates to challenge, I don't think our challenge is far-fetched or very different from others. Our main challenge was the acquisition of data. That's really what it was. There's no framework in yet where there's a repository of all climate change related or GHG and so on type of data. And so relying on the availability of stakeholders and the availability of them housing data in their facilities was a challenge for us. Do differently, I'd probably start earlier. It was an intense process, but we got through at the end of the day, and a part of it being an intense process was the fact that we had to rely on others in an effort to get the information and to complete the analysis work. So that for us was a major challenge. In terms of the lessons learned, preparedness is key. I think you start early, you try to find the direction that you need to go, and you prepare, you plan, try to find out how you're going to get there. That for us was key. And not just plan just for this one event, because this is also adding to other things to come. And so we had a bigger picture, and the NDC really is just one part of that bigger picture. And I guess we'll hear a little bit more of that as we continue the discussions going forward. I'd probably pause there, Lena, to allow others to chime in.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Omar. And I think for a very, very clear call to action for anyone who has not yet started. A year isn't enough. So I guess that's an interesting experience, that it does, of course, take time. It takes preparedness. Thank you also for giving us a bit of a glimpse as to what you've done with adaptation, because that, of course, is a big topic, I think, for a lot of countries in the region as well. So thank you very much for that initial insight into where you are in Jamaica. Chris, may I invite you to give us the same kind of an overview for Grenada, talk a bit about your process, innovative features, gaps you wish you could have done more work on, challenges, lessons learned, recommendations. The floor is yours, Chris.
Thank you very much, Lena. Good morning to everybody. So basically, we can say that our process started in 2018 in the context of reviewing the INDC in light of the Paris Agreement. The partnership engagement in Grenada was launched at what was essentially a scoping mission with a number of strategic key national stakeholders. Since then, there have been a number of engagements between international partners who are instrumental in providing a range of assistance. So engagements between them and local stakeholders from the private, public, community, academia, and non-state sectors has happened. We'll say that those engagements have been very constructive. Further engagements are envisaged, and it is already timetabled for. So for example, one such engagement will be towards the end of this month in the context of the Sustainable Development Council. So a document further to those engagements and discussions and all of that was prepared. That document was endorsed in terms of a plan by the national stakeholdership. It was endorsed at the ministerial level. And that plan was later submitted, and there was response from partners indicating their interest to support implementation, and basically a letter was submitted, and I think that was back in 2019, on the 20th of December actually in 2019, and that was submitted, and a range of partners came on board, and they have committed to providing assistance to the government of Grenada with its process. Our process has not yet been completed, so it is a work in progress. As part of the consultation activities, post the submission of the INDC, though, issues pertaining to the inclusion of refrigerant gases and I would say access to current and complete data, for example, were identified as gaps. So I would say data collection, data collation, and sharing, and the framework to manage same will be key aspects of that innovation relative to the revised NDC. And as we move forward, particularly for future NDCs, you know, that kind of a framework will be key. And I must say that that process has started as we are moving forward with this revision. Also, in terms of that innovative feature, I will say meaningful engagements of the private sector, more public sector engagement, and community-based and non-state actor organizations, including the inclusion of youth and gender, are part of that innovation. As it relates to what aspects do I think or wish could have had more work done? Well, our NDC will be mitigation centric, covering topics of energy, transport, forestry, and waste. I must say that perhaps an argument could be made for being a bit more holistic in focus to address adaptation also. And we recognize this, but a lot of the supporting data and information to run the analyses, etc., are not currently available per se. So the intention is to continue to work with the partners and stakeholders, see the extent we can generate the required data, and ultimately have adaptation as part of a future NDC. So agriculture, for example, could perhaps be part of that consideration, or even some aspects of energy as it relates to the water sector. In the meantime, though, there will be synergies between, it is contemplated that there will be synergies between other policy instruments, such as the National Adaptation Plan, wherein adaptation is addressed. Biggest challenges, I would agree with Omar here too. In Grenada, we have recognized data collection, particularly from public sector partners. So data is available, but it is disaggregated and fragmented in a way in terms of its collection and its storage among the agencies. This data is not necessarily fit for purpose, I would say. Agencies collect data relative to their mandates, which are not necessarily for climate analytics in terms of use. Therefore, when requests for data is made, it can be an unusual request relative to the specific data required, its technical specifications, etc. So oftentimes you have situations of data request fatigue and frustration setting in, as returning requests were often made to the agency, who are having to put aside their usual work to accommodate you know, the requests that are made. Additionally, there were concerns about sharing such data with unknown external partners, and how such data would be used was a major concern, and that contributed to the delays. As it relates to new sectors, and so there have been a deliberate discussion on including agriculture, but determination has been made that there is more specific work to be done here still. And we welcome the assistance of the partners who would be assisting in this regard. In the context of the refrigeration and air conditioning sector, the issues pertaining to the F gases are key relative to global warming potential, for example, the proliferation of the use of cooling technologies, and therein the correlation with the need for energy, and let us say the use for fossil fuel to provide that energy, and juxtaposing that against the emerging potential for renewable energy, for energy efficiency, sorry, through new technologies. So basically that was a no-brainer in terms of inclusion. How did we determine these? Through stakeholder engagement. What would we do differently next time around? Basically, I'll say that there should be a data collection framework in place. So a systemic approach would be part of an institutional framework, therefore ensuring longevity. A centralized and dedicated management structure would be established. So that would certainly contribute to doing a few things differently. There will be a greater ease, obviously, of undertaking robust analyses in a timely manner, having the system in place. You know, as we move forward, though, evidence-based decision-making will be demanded more. So I think the digitizing of information, for example, will be paramount, and the necessary systems will have to be established and implemented, particularly in the context of, let us say, information and electronic communication, wherein accuracy is key. In terms of important, well, I think I'll stop here for now.
Thank you very much, Christopher, for giving us a bit of an overview of where you are in Grenada. And I think recurring theme coming up there with the challenge, the data-related challenges. There's actually a comment on that also from the audience, and a call for the need for open data policy in the region. So maybe that is something that you could also think about and integrate into some of your next reflections around that as we continue. But and of course, this also has a bit of a call to everyone in the audience. Please do start posting your questions in the Q&A section. We'll have some time to take some of those as we go along. But before
Lena,
we do so, yes?
Lena, I just need to say though, because our work is a work in progress, it is our timeline to have a revised NDC and submitted by September of this year. So this is the timeline that we are working with our partners to achieve in.
Perfect. Thanks for that. Thanks for that update, Christopher. Just good to get your timeline in there as well. And with that, may I hand over to St. Lucia and Shanna to give us a bit of an overview of where St. Lucia is and where you are in terms of innovation, achievements, challenges, etc. Shanna, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Lena. Good day, everyone. So St. Lucia, we are also in the process of doing our revision exercises. We submitted our climate action enhancement package application last year. And we've been working probably from late last year, October to now, on getting our finalized revised NDC. For us, I would also support, well, what Grenada said. We are also looking at the inclusion of the refrigeration and air conditioning sector. And as part of ours, we're also developing a financing strategy for our NDC, because of course, we know that our NDCs, while they are raising ambition, we also know that there is a block for many of us as they are conditional based on access to readily available finance. So we are putting together a financing strategy in order so that our revised NDC would have a clear path for it being financed. Part of that would also include a section on how we could partner with the private sector. So there will be a section on PPPs and possible inclusion of the private sector as part of us achieving those NDC targets. The one other thing that we have that I thought that was innovative is that we are also aligning our NDC to our SDGs. Of course, they have a similar timeline. And so we're trying our best to align those two so that we can streamline the work that's being done. Which aspect did we wish we did a little more work in? I think the transport sector is one that's proving to be a challenge for us. Earlier, I think both the other presenters spoke about data. For us, we've seen that our transport sector and the data needs are great there. So I think that's something we're definitely going to be working towards over the next couple of years. We have a couple on upcoming projects that we hope to help us with that particular sector, but that one was not a very big part of this revision exercise. What would we do differently? Both my colleagues before said it best. Definitely start the process earlier. I think we started thinking about putting this together, putting something together maybe early last year. But of course, again, getting that support rolling about middle of last year. We worked really closely with the NDC partnership to put in our application early. I will say that we developed with the NDC partnership in 2018, we did develop a NDC partnership plan. This is a document that has a list of possible project ideas that we think are important to help us to implement our current NDC. And of course, it's a living document. So now that once we have our finalized revised NDC, we would add, if necessary, to that list of projects. And so having that made doing the actual document for our NDC a lot easier. We were able to pull out projects in there or things that we thought would be needed in there from that NDC partnership plan and put it into our application for the climate action enhancement package. So I think that made our process quite a quick one, and we were able to get rolling by October and start implementation January of this year. But if we were able to start earlier, that would definitely be something that would allow us to be really rolling in 2025 for the next one. Yeah, I think that I said everything I did under the questions you gave, Lena. So yeah, I really hope that we can do that. Oh, another thing I thought that has benefited us, and I hope we're able to do again in 2024, hopefully, would be the alignment with our Unf Triple C reporting processes. So for example, we just completed our GHG inventory for 2018. So that is fairly new, and we are able to assess where we are now, and then use that data, of course, to do our projections and our scenarios in order to build on our next NDC, to identify the sectors that we need to work on, etc. So I think having that alignment with the Unf Triple C processes, our NDCs and the SDGs, getting it all well aligned does help. And I think it's something that other countries can definitely use and benefit from. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Shanna. And if I may just keep you on there, because the other countries have already talked a little bit about adding new sectors, stakeholder engagement. Maybe you can just give us a couple sentences on that right away as well.
Sure. So for this, for our revised NDC, we really are looking at the refrigeration and air conditioning sector. That proved to be one of the sectors that when we did our last inventory, we really saw a big change in. Further to that, we're also looking at forestry. We were able to benefit from having done a full forest inventory going back as far as 20 years, and then looking at projections for the future. So we're hoping to add forestry to our revised NDC as well. Further stakeholder engagement, of course, has been a bit challenging due to COVID, but I think after a couple of weeks, we got it down. So we've been working with several sectors across the board, really bringing on the various players so that we can get wide stakeholders engagement. So we're working with finance and economic development to look at how we streamline our NDC budgeting, how we streamline our climate finance budgeting overall, working with our ozone units again on how we use the refrigeration and air conditioning, working closely with forestry on how we maintain their inventory, and what we can do to help further build on keeping our forests, maintaining the forest cover that we have now. We do also have an NDC Implementation Committee that has been working with the NDC partnership plan to ensure that, again, we're aligning our targets with the work that we do in the various agencies, not just ours, but across the board within the government of St. Lucia. So yeah, so we've been doing both at the same time, hoping to have wide stakeholder engagement. A lot of it is online, and I think all of us are kind of getting used to this new environment where we're working more remotely, but still working together as much as possible. So I applaud our team that's helping us to implement our climate action enhancement package, because I think they've really gone out of their way to find new methods and new ways of engaging with our stakeholder base, even though it's remote right now.
Thank you very much, Shanna, and thank you very much for leading us over into kind of the next round of questions that I had for the countries. Before we then move into also getting the partners who would have been working with the countries on said climate enhancement packages and these types of things. So maybe if you can add a little in terms of, well, something that Shanna already mentioned, the pandemic would have obviously affected all countries, I suspect, in this. Stakeholder engagement being one area, but in a very, I guess, tech-savvy region, it looks like this is something that is being overcome. Are there other things that come to mind where the pandemic has really affected the revision process? But maybe also a few more comments on this whole topic of ambition and to what extent you have been successful in raising ambition and how that's happened. And maybe if you can also into this next round of comments from each of you, take in a question that has come from the floor. You've all mentioned a challenge on data collection, and here's a question around whether there is also an equal, bigger or smaller challenge with getting agreement on the type and extent of action. What's your take? Does better data help getting better agreements on action as well? Where is that link? And in the interest of time, because that seems to be ticking very fast today, could I also then ask you to immediately give us some thoughts on where you are with regard to the support you have been receiving and have been able to access. How difficult was it to access support? Were you ready as an agency or country to receive it? And what is some of also the advice that you would be giving to the partner organizations to help smooth and streamline and improve that whole process and set countries up for success there really? So if I may pass the mic back to you, Omar, for an additional round of comments from you. And yeah, keep in mind that I'm kind of pulling things together a little bit. So any lead over to the partners, please do put that into this round. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Lena. Several things to cover. As it relates to better data leading to better commitment. I'm not too sure that would be the best strategy. Countries themselves would have to commit to the action. And then from that commitment, a framework or so on would have been put in place, especially to collect the data. And then from that, you have the data to do your necessary modeling or analysis work or whatever other policy recommendations are required. But the commitment has to come first from the stakeholders and from the policymakers that this is something necessary. I don't think just having the data is going to lead you there. Persons have to see why this is necessary. That's my take, right? I mean, I could be wrong, but that's how I view it. As it relates to the difficulties in determining how to raise ambition, we saw from the get-go that we couldn't use just intuition or just basic observation. Our last national communication produced a Gggi inventory that ended in 2012, right? And that was used to assist us to develop the first NDC in 2015. And so on top of that, what we did was to build on it to include the additional information for energy and to include new information for land use change and forestry. And then from that was able to ascertain what the benefits could be to us as it relates to raising ambition, right? So that's kind of the approach that we took as it relates to determining it. I'd mentioned before the fact that we did an assessment first, and then from that assessment, we're able to ascertain what sectors we could quantify versus what sectors we could just give descriptive elements for. And that's how we determined that it was expansion of what already existed for energy, and then inclusion of forestry as the new child on the block. And so as it relates to stakeholder engagement, well, we have been working with partners who are not local. So from the very beginning, we have been able to put some kind of, I guess you could call it framework or process in place whereby we're able to do communication with our partners and with the stakeholders that we needed to engage with to get the data. And so from very beginning, we were using virtual conferences, Zoom and Skype and so on platforms to be able to do our work. It became more intense, however, of course, with the pandemic, because now you couldn't even go into office. You are working from home. And so we had scheduled visitations from our overseas partners, and that of course was scrapped. And so we relied entirely on technology. And frankly, I think we were successfully able to do that because we had several consultations with key stakeholders, those reviewing documents before it became final. And even before we submitted to the Unf Triple C, our major stakeholder briefing was via virtual conference, right? And it was a major event. It was a successful event, and everything ran smoothly as best as it could given the technology. So that's really how we had approached it. I don't know, did I cover everything, Lena, or did I leave anything out? Probably could prips me.
No, I think you've pretty much covered everything. Shanna, are you saying? Sorry, I see you. No, yeah. No, I think thank you very, very much again for some additional insights, for talking a little bit about how things work under the under the new circumstances. Christopher, may I ask you to provide some additional comments from Grenada, please?
Sure. So following on to the comments, some of the comments that Omar made in the context of better data leading to better commitment. I too I'm not sure, but what I do know is that data is queen, and I mean the use of proxies cannot continue to be business as usual. So we must have data in an effort to have informed discussions and make similar decisions. So data is indeed a prerequisite for all of that, and having quality data is absolutely necessary. As it relates to the pandemic, well, COVIDious times has meant physical distancing, and that has a major impact in terms, has had a major impact in terms of travel of resource personnel, especially those, you know, having to cross borders. So in-person engagements have been absolutely restricted. I mean, today's forum, for example, is a testimony of the impact of this COVIDious times. And so the use of technology has proliferated, and there is a cabinet appointed committee to help manage and drive this process. And I must say that we have been basically using this technology, continuing to have weekly meetings and engagements with our international, regional, and local partners in a virtual space. And that continues, and it is something that we foresee in terms of engagement of our stakeholdership that is going to continue to happen. As it relates to difficulties in determining how and where ambitions could be raised, well, for a very tiny, extremely vulnerable, small island developing state, I think the answer is no. So from a policy point of view, every facet of our society and economy must be climate proof if we are to survive in a manner without sustaining too many injuries, if you will, that could be associated with climate change and its surrogates. So the situation of COVID, for example, highlights this. So it is about facilitating resilience. Everything cannot be done at once. So it was about identifying the critical areas where the impacts could be made relative to changing from business as usual, and attempting to leverage, if you will, efforts, financing, capacity and institutional arrangements, if you will, to accomplish incremental changes. As part of our INDC process, 2010 was established as the base year, for example, and it was determined that for that year, approximately 250,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent was emitted. Therefore, the ambition was to reduce same to approximately 150,000 tons by 2025, and that is representing a 30% reduction and 40% of the base year's level by 2013. So the analyses and modeling and building of scenarios that we are currently going through has the aim to have a revised NDC, like I said, by September, and then we'll be in a better position to speak on, you know, the ambitions and the commitments then. As an agency, were we ready to receive support? Absolutely. The truth is, perhaps we could have been more ready, but by having a proper data collection and management system in place. But hey, when you live on a tiny island and life gives you coconuts, you crack them open, do a lot of hard work, and you produce delicious coconut tarts on the other side of the process. Here, I must say it is necessary to recognize the leadership of our global personalities as it relates to climate change agenda, and that of the PS Hutchinson, Leon Charles, Dr. Spencer Thomas, and the entire negotiating team, and obviously also the cabinet appointed committee. Hey, we had to be ready. So, yeah. On support, how difficult it was to access support. Well, I must confess, I have not been directly involved in this activity, but it is my understanding that once there was a plan of action, which was endorsed by, you know, the national stakeholders and the ministry, and it was possible to secure then the external support from the partners, you know. So from coordinating the entire process to modeling and scenario building, the calculations relative to the agriculture sector and social adaptation, issues pertaining to gender and youth, to linkages with the NAPs. So herein, I think, you know, I should perhaps say on behalf of the permanent secretary and the government of Grenada, you know, expressions of gratitude for the support of the NDC partnership and all the partners, and we look forward to continued collaboration in this regard. In terms of, yeah, I think I'll stop here.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And thank you for also giving us already the lead over to the partners who will be coming on very shortly. Shanna, over to you for your, I guess, final round in this initial round of country inputs. And maybe if you could also take a brief look at one of the questions that has been coming in around the consideration for NDC implementation and tracking throughout the update process. Recognizing, of course, that a lot of the NDC targets would have been conditional. How does that relate, the tracking of implementation, the new ambition? Maybe you can add that to your comments for this round. Shanna, over to you.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Lena. So I will start with the data question. So I think overall we have found that having better data would lead us to better modeling, creating better scenarios, and then I think we make the more sound decisions as it relates to our interventions. And then of course looking at the extent and the type of support that we would need. So for that question, absolutely, I think having the better data puts us in a better position to have a more targeted response to get us where we need to go. As it relates to the NDC implementation and tracking, so we're actually we are working on building a new MRV system that will allow us to see our NDC, tracking our NDC. Further to that, as part of our NDC revision, we are working with our energy agency on building a energy management system. For us, our first NDC was very mitigation focused, and so we're going to have this system that will allow us to at least see our largest sector and be able to know where it's going, and then we can seek to have the interventions needed in order to mitigate those. The other questions, just give me 1 second, let me pull them up. So we spoke about how the pandemic, so I kind of alluded to this. I think there was a little while in there, probably in March, where we were unsure about how we were going to work everything out, but overall, we're back on track now. We're having all the consultations we need to have. We're trying our best also not to fatigue our stakeholders, so we find ourselves really, we have a great team doing our revision, and I think they've been working together as much as possible. So we'll have one meeting, but we try to hit several different parts or components of our NDC revision package, hoping that people don't get tired of us always calling them out. So we try to streamline our meetings to ensure that we're able to achieve multiple objectives at once. Yeah, I think that's it from me. I think I answered all the questions. Okay, yes, so that's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Support. I didn't talk about that.
That was
Sorry,
good.
that's my last question. So on support. So I will say this. I think what has happened, at least in our case, so the NDC partnership support came, it was the first to come. It came about middle of 2019. Like I said, we were able to hit it because we had our partnership plan. So we were able to, we really knew where we wanted to go with this, and we were able to put together our package and get it signed off by October. And we thank the NDC partnership for that and having kind of the foresight. Since then, we have been approached by several other agencies wanting to assist, and so I would hope that the next time around the support comes earlier. That way we're able to better align what we want the various agencies with their various specific targeted sectors to be able to really help us get on that. So having this kind of foresight and not coming in the year of the revision, but prior to it, I think would allow us to be able to get more support and get more out of all the various supports. But when you have several streams of support coming in, then it really becomes about, as much as possible, not duplicating effort and making sure that it goes further. And without us seeing having seen some of the outputs, it's difficult to know what the next step would be. So I think that when agencies, donors, when they want to give the support, especially for NDC, which does have a timeline, coming in that year before, kind of early in the year before, allows countries like ours to be able to really streamline where we want those interventions to be and the kind of support that we need. So I would ask for that for 2024.
Thank you very much, Shana. I think we've heard a number of comments on the support. Some thank yous for very valuable support, but also I think a very important call on earlier, more aligned support where a lot is happening in the region. I think this is a great time to hand over to the partners and get them to give us some reflections on where they are with their programming, how the comments the countries have made resonates with them, and just give us a bit of a feel of what the partner perspective on this is. We've heard the NDC partnership mentioned a few times. I'm not sure we've really heard very much of UNDP yet. So maybe, James, if I could pass the mic to you first for your brief comments on where UNDP fits into this picture.
Great, thank you, Lena. Can you hear me okay? Great,
yes.
Good morning, and thank you to the organizers for allowing me to participate in this very interesting discussion. My name is James Venner, and I'll be speaking briefly from the context of the UNDP initiative known as the Climate Promise. And thank you again to the wonderful 3 country examples, which really help, I think, frame some pioneering approaches to NDC revision. Currently, as you're aware, NDCs are inadequate to put us on a safe, sustainable path to 1.5 degrees. So unprecedented climate action is critical to reverse this momentum. Especially, it's more challenging when economies are burdened by responding to a global pandemic. So to help deliver on the Paris Agreement, UNDP launched the Climate Promise last year to help at least 100 countries to enhance their NDCs and increase their ambition. So far, we're up to 112 countries, and implementation is underway in 101. Through the Climate Promise, UNDP has committed $25 million and mobilized resources from Germany, EU, Spain, Italy, and Sweden, and works in close collaboration with the NDC partnership. Originally, we targeted a completion date by COP26 to support countries with their second NDC revision submission, but because of COVID virus, it's now pushed into 2021. In the Caribbean, Climate Promise supports NDC enhancement in 11 countries, and all 11 have submitted COVID-adjusted work plans and are in various stages of implementation. For each of these countries, UNDP works very closely with the governments to determine a specific trajectory for the project, for this work, and countries have prioritized 5 different streams. So UNDP supports countries to build political will and societal ownership. At the national and subnational level, we're reviewing and updating NDC targets, incorporating new sectors and gases, assessing NDC costs and investment opportunities. And though I mentioned it last, is every country has highlighted this so far, and that is also strengthening data collection systems, or MRV, and transparency. I don't want to underestimate that, and also highlight the work that's being done led by Unf Triple C in the Caribbean Cooperative MRV Hub. So, so those are the 5 main streams. Across countries universally, we highlight linking NDCs with SDGs and key platforms like DRR and NAPS, and reaching across ministries. Citizen engagement and grassroots efforts were largely omitted during design of the first NDCs. So we also promote, highlight whole of society platforms to more fully engage with women, youth groups, indigenous populations, and the private sector. In fact, gender mainstreaming has been one of our more prioritized activities that countries are highlighting. And we've also formed key partnerships to help connect technical experts with countries. So we're working closely with UNEP, FAO, UNICEF, UN Habitat, IRENA, GCF, and of course the NDC partnership. So I'll just wrap up by highlighting that as governments are, prioritizing their resources to address the pandemic, efforts are underway to put in place new strategies and investment packages to hit this recovery. And hopefully NDCs can serve as a blueprint for these recovery efforts and help economies be more climate resilient and equitable in the future. And as a couple of examples, through the Climate Promise, we support Antigua and Barbuda and Dominica in conducting socioeconomic impact analyses of NDC targets that can hopefully inform post-COVID strategies. And we're also helping prioritize private sector engagement and investment with an emphasis on green jobs. For example, in Belize, we're supporting the green economy transition via a macroeconomic assessment. So I'll finish there. I apologize for speaking so quickly, but I'll be glad to elaborate and feel free to contact me if you need further information. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, James, for sticking with it with a very brief time that we have, unfortunately, today. And thank you also for mentioning some of the important issues around costs, investment opportunities, and some of these things that are obviously on the agenda for a lot of countries in the region. As well as the whole alignment with the disaster risk preparedness and adaptation, of course. Francis, if I may hand over the mic to you next for a bit of a perspective from climate analytics. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Lena, and good morning, everybody. Pleasure to be with you all here. Through the NDC Partnerships CAP initiative, Climate Analytics is providing technical assistance to 6 countries globally, and 3 of which are actually in the OECS. We are providing assistance in partnership with the Commission, with the OECS Commission, and also with Gggi. Those include Antigua and Barbuda, Grenada, and St. Lucia. Parties are supposed to submit progressively more ambitious NDCs every 5 years to ultimately achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. And while countries in the region intend to do so or are working towards that, they're balancing an expectation of expanding sectors and gases and increasing ambition with the capacity to actually undertake those future reporting requirements. So that's something that is also a challenge at the moment that countries are grappling with. Several speakers before me have mentioned and highlighted some of the challenges that have been faced, noting we hope that 2020 is not going to be a new norm, and when we move into a future cycle, we won't be facing the same types of challenges we have done this year. But I would say that in the process, it is extremely vital for partners to step up to the plate and work together to provide comprehensive and synergetic support. It's been a lot to ask of capacity constrained small countries, especially when this year, especially a lot of the environment or climate change divisions sometimes sit within the same ministry as health. And that has also added another layer of complexity. I would say Omar, Chris, and Shanna all mentioned before that, we have to look at this in a cyclical manner. Going into 2025, especially if there's a mechanism like the CAP, we need to look at this in advance, make strides toward that. Building on regional and national processes and institutions like the RCC are extremely vital, building on existing things that are there, not duplicate efforts. I would say that some of the challenges that we've faced are similar, data gaps, timelines. I think Shana mentioned this, and so did Omar, in looking at streamlining timelines, especially for reporting requirements going forward, like national communications, BURs, future BTRs, much of which is actually required as the fundamental baseline of developing new targets. And that's really important and shouldn't be understated. We've been reflecting upon this quite a bit, and we'll be working with other partners, with the OECS, Gggi, GIZ, UNDP, to look at lessons learned and feeding into the following cycle, where as much as possible to learn and pull that support forward and push other partners to also do so and work together. I say I'd finish on an important point that Shana raised, and while the revision process is important, to truly realize that ambition, that aspirational ambition, and those conditional targets that are outlined in NDCs, it's really, really important to also complement that with implementation on the ground. I don't think it's fair to request small countries, especially SIDS in the Caribbean, to continuously increase ambition without requisite support. And so I'd invite everybody to continue to look at that going into the future. Some of those challenges that we have seen, not necessarily through the cap in the revision process, but in translating that on the groundwork, is specifically related to financing, capital intensive investments, debt to GDP ratios, and AOSIS has been leading the way on a lot of this, access to concessional financing, de-risking investments, private sector involvement, regulatory barriers, competitiveness with phasing out of existing fossil fuel reliant power stations. Anyways, to assist in tackling some of these very region specific challenges that kind of all culminate in one bigger challenge in achieving additional ambition, we need to think outside the box quite a lot, build on country-driven approaches, and work together as partners, because we all have our specific expertise that will assist the countries if we really and truly work together and actually coordinate a little bit more. I think that's a lesson to learn on our side for sure.
Thank you very much, Frances. And I think for ending also on that very important point of alignments between the partners, you've already mentioned one of the partners you are currently working with, amongst others, is Gggi. We have Kristen Deason joining us today from her holiday and by phone. So thank you very much, Kristen, for being here. Anyway, the floor is yours for some comments on Ggi's take on things.
Thank you, Lena. Just to make sure, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, great. Thanks, I'll go ahead. Thanks everyone, and thanks for including me in today's webinar. Just wanted to give a quick intro to Gggi and the work that we're doing in the Caribbean with countries on NDCs. So Gggi is the Global Green Growth Institute. We are an international intergovernmental organization based in South Korea, focused on working with the governments of developing countries to promote environmentally sustainable, inclusive economic growth. So Gggi has programs in over 30 countries. OECS actually became our first organizational member in 2019. And by virtue of this membership, we are now working with several OECS member states, mainly on projects related to climate change, renewable energy, and climate finance. So on the NDC side, we are working with the NDC partnership through the Climate Action Enhancement Package project, closely with partners OECS, Climate Analytics, and a few other projects on CAP projects in 3 Caribbean countries, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Lucia, and Grenada. So I'll give a quick overview of the tasks that we are leading in the 3 countries. So in St. Lucia, we're working on 3 tasks. The first one is focused on fossil fuel taxation and subsidy modeling. The government in St. Lucia believes that there is an overconsumption of fossil fuel in the country, possibly due to low rates of taxation. So we are modeling various policy scenarios to look at how the taxation schemes could be adjusted and what the effects would be in terms of carbon emissions and on government revenues. We are working closely on this with WRI, World Resources Institute, who is also working on a related task of doing more microeconomic analysis, ensuring that the proposed schemes don't unfairly affect any specific segments of the population. We're also working on a climate financing strategy that Shanna alluded to earlier. This is a strategy for putting mechanisms in place that can be used to finance programs and projects aimed at meeting the NDC goals. And it includes innovative financing mechanisms like green bonds, national financing vehicles, public-private partnerships, and debt for climate swaps, among others. The third task in St. Lucia is on climate budget tracking, so developing processes that can be put in place to measure spending and investments related to NDCs and climate action. In Antigua, we are working on about 4 different tasks. We are drafting an NDC implementation plan, which includes stakeholder outreach. We are working on development of an MRV strategy, so a framework for tracking mitigation and adaptation actions. We are developing a program to promote inclusive access to renewable energy, and also working closely with climate analytics on some aspects of developing a climate risk insurance program for farmers and fishers. In Grenada, we are focused on one task, looking at data collection and development of data gathering processes for a number of sectors, including waste, agriculture, and refrigeration and air conditioning. So I think my 3 minutes are just up, but I'll comment briefly that I think the knowledge exchange like we're doing here today is very important, because I think the countries and the regions can learn a lot from each other. And I'll point out that, you know, obviously the task that I mentioned that Gggi is working on is not all the tasks in the CAP project, it's just some of them, but I think it shows how the countries in some respects are taking different approaches to this. And so I think where possible, it might be helpful to look at perhaps standardizing the approach to NDC development and some of the surrounding tasks in the future. Obviously, you're not going to standardize it completely because each country has different needs, but I think, you know, like I said, doing this information exchange and understanding what's going on in the different countries is helpful, because I think there's certain things that not all countries are doing that may be helpful to the others, or at least to, you know, discuss what the approach is. But happy to take further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristen. Yeah, and thanks also for giving us some concrete examples in the interest of really having an experience exchange. Countries, you know, may hear topics that are on their kind of to-do list and then have the opportunity to follow up individually there as well. There's been a few mentions now of CAP, which is an NDC partnership program. That's my cue to hand over to you, Jakob.
Right, yeah, thank you. No, I really appreciate this debate and also this clear presentations of where the countries in the region are going. What Omar, Shanna, and Christopher said, I think that was really resonating what really is happening on the ground. And that is what it makes so special, this NDC process. Getting all the partners aligned, really putting the country in the driver's seat. That is something we've said for many years, but I think it's now really happening. And that is so positive. I heard that there was an encouragement for partners to come on board a bit earlier in the process and perhaps not chip in after processes have started. I would also like to turn it around. It's also a signal that partners are really getting on board, that they see progress, that they put trust in the way forward, and therefore are starting to chip in. Hopefully in future that will go faster, but I think this is a very good and strong process, and it's owned by all partners. The NDC partnership is a facilitator and is not doing things in itself, but helping that things move ahead. On the CAB, that is the Climate Action Enhancement Program, which started up mid last year, where the idea was, how can we really strengthen ambition in the NDCs in the run up to the COP26? And how can we also help to accelerate implementation? And within a couple of months, and I found this really impressive, we got several donors around the table in really making funding available, whether through a central fund or directly at country level, bilateral, but all coordinated through a joint partnership approach. And it's now up and running, and indeed 6 of the Caribbean countries are also making use of it. This is indeed funding which is available, and I had some figures here where it says that in total the 6 Caribbean countries proposed 185 different activities, and that $3.8 million is now available. And this is with support of 16 partners. Most of them you've already heard, but there are many more as well. And that important percentage is for the enhancement of the current NDCs, for funding stakeholder consultations, in designing implementation plans, strengthening data and MRV systems. But also an important part, roughly a third, is geared towards the implementation of NDCs. And that's where our partners are helping for macroeconomic modeling, designing financial strategies, long-term low greenhouse gas and resilient development financial strategies. So a lot is now geared towards enhancing the NDCs by strengthening ambition and really accelerating implementation. And that brings me to my last point. I think what is so remarkable also in the Caribbean region, and I mentioned 3 elements are the welcoming, the whole of government approach, the inclusion of CSOs and the business sector, as well as very strong and clear partnership plans. That is where also I think now that you're making business cases and identifying investment plans, that is where I think you're also important in showing how access to finance and making things really run and having innovative public-private partnerships going. That is where I think you're also a region where many partners will look at you and see how this will be designed and how this is proceeding. So I'm happy also to be part of that together with the NDC partnership and all the many partners we have around the table. So I hope this helps in giving feedback. It's really an exciting event, and we are very proud that we, with all the partners, are part of it. Thank you, Lena.
Thank you very much, Jakob. Thank you also for again bringing up this link to implementation, how important, of course, that is when the robot actually hits the road, and of course picking up on the data issue as well. That has come up a few times. Over to you, Ventura, for some comments from the Unf Triple C.
Thanks, Lena, and thanks for all the partners and the countries for their valuable inputs. I just wanted to highlight 3 points around the observations we had. We are not an implementing agency, but we've been working with most of the countries and the partners in supporting the countries. One thing I think is an opportunity that NDC presented as well as a challenge the countries have to overcome is aligning and cooperation amongst the various institutions within the country. And this also touched on the engagement of the private sector. And this is a key thing that's important. One, in the challenges that we have on the data, the availability of data and the data collection, it's going to be more important when we want to track the performance. So not necessarily what is the overall achievement, but also how we are progressing towards achieving those targets. It might be more complicated in some sectors, or like transport, for example. If you implement a policy on transportation, how are you performing on that goal? Might be simpler on some of the things, like if you are introducing renewable energy, it's easier to track. So it's important that there is work around, I think, from the country's perspective, as much as the partners in coordination, that there is national level coordination. There was, of course, a lot of challenges this year with COVID, but I think that's something that we need to identify and address at country level going forward. Also taking into account the challenge that we have, that we don't have many staff in the different institutions to provide information, to coordinate. So that has been an additional burden, and that's, I think, something that the partners has to recognize and also take into consideration while planning, and I believe that also touches on some of the challenges that Shana, Omar, and Chris mentioned about getting started early so that you have enough time to engage the partners throughout. Then on the second point that I wanted to highlight was about that we still need a lot of support from the international partners. So it's not about just getting the NDC completed. And that's something that we missed out on the last INDC track. We left it till 5 years now. We're going to look back and trying to dig up what we had committed and where we are. Not so all the countries, I think most of the countries, I would say, in the Caribbean, we have the challenge where we had to look back to see how well we've achieved those commitments that we had made, and then let us make a lesson that we do not drop the ball on that when going forward, because we need to report on the performance, and this is something I think that we need support from the partners on to keep track of, as much as the other points that was raised on the implementation, on finance, technology, and other capacity building needs. Then the third point I wanted to highlight, which was mentioned in several of the presentations, including from James, Gggi mentioned this about the other things that we have to also consider. So these are not isolated policies we are talking about, implementation, targeting, addressing climate change, but these are about issues to do with the national development. And while we implement some of these issues, whether it be mitigation or adaptation, there would be other socio-economic impacts on the other sectors that need to be addressed through parallel policies. So I see some of the countries are now considering this, but this is something that we had missed out also while we do consider implementation of mitigation actions, either for the energy security or for climate change or for development issues. We also need to address the other socio-economic impacts from these policies, and this is something that's important. The topics like just transition, which was mentioned, the stranded assets, and how these are going to be addressed. So I hope that the countries more increasingly learn lessons from the countries that have started thinking around this process, that these factors will be also considered so that you minimize the negative impacts and try to maximize on the positive impacts of the social economic impacts of these mitigation actions that are going to take place. Thank you. Back to you, Lena.
Thank you very much, Ventura. Over to you, Maya, and to all, maybe just a slight note that we are a few minutes behind time. So another reminder to keep it brief, please, because the private sector has come up many times. So I think there's a lot of us who can't wait for the inputs of Ignatius and Maxwell from two of the key sectors. I hope maybe everybody has an extra 5 minutes or so we can squeeze it in. We're looking forward to your inputs, and we're almost there. But in the interim, over to you, Maya, with also a very important addition to the discussion around what your plans are in the region.
Thank you, Lena, and good morning, everyone. Again, for those of you who joined from the beginning, now you know why my opening remarks were very brief, and I'll try being as brief as possible now as well. Well, as all of you know, the World Bank is involved in supporting countries in the region in more than one way when it comes to investment programs, technical assistance in a number of sectors that are more or less directly linked to the NDC implementation. But we are increasingly also supporting countries specifically on the NDC enhancement and implementation. An example of such work you could hear from Omar's presentation at the very beginning. Today, I will briefly tell you about our recently initiated regional program that is focusing on NDC implementation and is focusing on OECS, so hopefully relevant to all of you. I will not even try to present you with all the details of the program itself, but rather focus on the approach so that you first get familiarized with it, but also to facilitate hopefully all the subsequent discussions, both with the countries and the partners in terms of defining specific activities and the work programs. Now, before doing that, I do want to mention that this regional program, and as well as our other NDC work in the region, This is being implemented under the NDC partnership umbrella. So the World Bank is putting its own resources and technical expertise to help the countries. But we are closely coordinating, of course, with all the partners active in the field, in this case, in the region. And now going back to the program. So what we're talking about is really a 2-year regional program, set of technical assistance type of activities. And the first question that I get as someone who's managing it from the World Bank side is, why regional? And I think the answer is more than clear to all of us who are present today. Yes, NDCs are and will remain nationally driven processes, of course. But given the small size of the economies, as well as the commonly shared priority sectors and priorities in general, as well as the implementation challenges we heard, we thought there was a merit to initiate a regional program focusing on the NDC that we call Deep Dive, as you could see in the agenda. And what that means in reality is really a mix of country-specific and regional activities, trying or geared towards 3 broad objectives. One is to really help support the development of regulatory, institutional, legal frameworks for the NDC implementation. And as we heard today, there are a lot of challenges around those, especially when it comes to cross-sectoral coordination and policy interactions. The second one would be to identify the cost-effective NDC implementation plans, or really the project pipelines, building on all the great work that has been done in the region already in those countries that have partnership plans, but going a step further and really developing them from the project point of view, including with the potential financing and implementation mechanisms, which is yet another challenge that many countries are facing when trying to transform their policy objectives into bankable projects, as we call them. And the third objective is really around our efforts to improve what we call climate finance readiness, climate finance in the broadest possible sense. Finance or the lack of it, is an issue, and I'm happy that we'll hear from the private sector in a little bit as well. So reliance on grants and straightforward non-transformational projects probably won't get us to the level we want to get. So under this objective, we would be looking at helping countries really structure strong, technically solid, innovative financing deals that can be used then for the implementation of their NDC specific actions or projects. And related to these 3 objectives, we're talking really about 3 broad areas. And as you can tell, the program is quite comprehensive, it is flexible, and it's country driven, which is why the immediate next step for us would be really to develop specific work programs based on bilateral in-country discussions. Some of that is already happening, most notably in Grenada, where we have initiated some of the work under this program, but also with our development partners and first and foremost OECS Commission, when it comes to the regional aspect of our program, so knowledge, peer exchange, just as we're having today. We wouldn't want to duplicate the efforts, but would rather like to leverage all the great mechanisms that exist. So we'll be looking into using those and leveraging those to deliver on the regional aspect of this program. And as I said, I won't get into examples of the specific activities that can or will be doing. Our immediate next steps would be to continue in country consultations, based on which we would develop the work programs and hopefully initiate the program soon after. So with that, I will stop and say, Lina, you can take it from here. I would be happy, of course, to answer any questions during Q&A sessions today or bilaterally after this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maya, for giving us a bit of a glimpse of what your plans and also started activities are around this in the region. I think we'll be hearing more from you on this over the course of the next few weeks and months, and really look forward to seeing that shape up and fit in with all the rest of the activities that are happening in the region. So great to hear that you have this alignment aspects firmly built into what you're planning to do as well. You've also mentioned your excitement around the private sector, and I think that has come through in a lot of discussions. So let me just hand straight over to the representatives we have online today from two sectors that haven't really been discussed much in terms of the new sectors that countries are bringing in, because they would have probably been priority sectors for most countries from the beginning. May I hand over to you first, maybe Maxwell, to speak a little bit from your perspective on the energy sector, which is a sector, of course, that has been in the NDCs from the start in all, I think, of the Caribbean countries. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me well enough? Excellent. So first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting us to this exchange. I found it to be quite illuminating, and so exciting to see the work that's being done by the countries in question, and I'm encouraged by what I've heard. Honestly, when we initially talked about participating, I had some concerns because we have experienced some challenges, and I will talk about those challenges as well. But I'm encouraged in two fronts. One is the fact that we are, by virtue of COVID-19, forced to engage in technology whereby we can communicate with each other. As someone who lives outside of the region, it's challenging sometimes to engage with individuals in the region because one of time differences, and secondly, I have to physically travel there. Now, someone who's coming from the middle of the United States, traveling to the Caribbean, sometimes it takes me anywhere from 18 to 30 hours of traveling, and that's just one way. So I'm encouraged to see that we are utilizing technology, and that we begin forced to utilize technology, and hopefully going forward that we can continue to do so, because I think that would give us an opportunity to escalate our level of collaboration and escalate the amount of level of information that we can share between one another, and certainly improve that. The second area I want to highlight and be excited about is the recognition that there needs to be some sort of universality as far as data collection, data monitoring, and data management. For me, that's key because of the fact that in order to make sound decisions, you sort of need to have data. And so that's a bit important. And I'm glad to see that that has been recognized by the countries that are sharing. Hopefully going forward, that there can be some of the destruction of silos that has caused us to be in a position now where you have to sort of pry it out of someone's hands to get information that is beneficial, not just to the country that we all live in, but also to the region that we are all part of. And so that kind of takes me to my theme. As far as understanding my role in the energy sector is just that fact. As a company, WorldTech Energy, our focus is on energy independence for the region. Our company consists of diaspora members from Jamaica, Antigua, St. Lucia, Guyana, and Trinidad and Tobago. And so our entire focus has been in terms of how do we support, based on the knowledge, experience, and education that we have acquired living in the United States, how can we transition that to our homeland, our home area? And so we've been engaged in conversations now for the past 3 years. And so as much as I'm encouraged, I have to give you some not so good news. The reality for us and the challenge from a private sector perspective, especially in the area of energy, is the challenge of regulation. We have to be honest and realize that if we're going to ambitiously move forward in the area of energy independence, in the area of carbon emission reduction, we have to address that fact. Individual governments as well as collective governments have to look at that, which starts there, because as a private entity, we come to a country to do business and we're looking for a level playing field so that where regulations and laws applies to everybody on the same level. This, of course, will not just for us, but also spur competition within the private sector, and that will give you the level of innovation that you're looking for, because we're the ones who are we're not, subject to any sort of regulation when our creativity is concerned. It's only subject to whether or not our investment partners, support the ideas that we put on the table, which may be, sort of crazy sometimes. But once we get to flush those out, we can come to market with programs and systems that we have proven and tested that will work. And so therefore, having a regulatory environment that encourages that sort of creativity that's laid out by the government is important. And so one of the chief components or challenges that we have run into is the fact that in a number of countries, and again, we are primarily focused on energy, whereby the utility company is either owned in part by the government or solely by a private entity. And the regulation in those countries favor that utility, making it a monopoly. I don't see how much innovation can be developed if we, in terms of opening the market space to spur the level of innovation that we're seeking in these programs that we've been talking about all day today, can thrive in an environment where it is legislated monopoly. So that's kind of problematic. So I wanted to just make that point out. The other thing too is to look at when we talk about transition to clean energy or transition to energy independence, it's not just about turning on electricity. We have to look at the broader implication on how it impacts the socioeconomic components of it. And meaning that it's going to impact every single citizen of that individual country and the region at large. And so when we think about energy independence, we look at the different sectors that are impacted by current high cost of energy production. What is utility companies? Obviously, they have to invest in fossil fuel, which they have no control over for the most part. Many of our islands do not produce oil. And so therefore, we are exporting our resources generated in our country to another country to provide energy for us. So wherein we're looking at energy independent transitions, we have to look at job creation. We have to look at the impact on poverty, and we talked earlier about gender relations and the youth. We have to look at how those things impact them as well, because in fact, they're sort of about the future of our countries, right? And get them involved in the conversation, not writing policy that hope that they come along, but rather engage them in terms of how we set policy going forward. I'm going to digress for just a brief moment here. To that end, about 2 years ago, we talked about implementing data science institutes in the various islands, and the purpose of that is fourfold. First of all, it would encourage the youth to be involved in big data collection and understanding of how big data works. Secondly, it would employ the interaction with the multiple agencies in the country, i.e. health, agriculture, etc. So there would be essentially a repository of information that can be gathered and be used by policymakers as they're making policy that impacts those individual agencies. So that would be a great element or great sector, quite frankly, to introduce young people to, and then we would build a sustainable area whereby education, job creation, etc., and of course, good sound policy can be derived. Lastly, I'll talk about market competitiveness. And I alluded to that a moment ago, and that is how the current regulations can impact the competitiveness of the countries moving forward. We've heard a lot about financing. As a private company, I have my own financier. So if I come to a country with a project to discuss a project, if the regulation does not support me being there, my finance company is not going to want me to be there. And they're not going to support the project because there's uncertainty. And as a private sector, we are not fans of uncertainty. And so when regulation is not clear across the board, where it creates an even playing field, I know it drips into everything, doesn't it? Then it causes challenges. So wherein we can look at, and as far as our company is concerned, providing opportunities for the countries, and I've looked at some of the projections in terms of your plans to reduce your carbon emissions, and also to look at the percentage of energy production that comes from renewable energy and the target dates of 2025 and 2030. We currently have a technology that can, one, reduce the length of time that you're projecting, and secondly, potentially increase the amount of energy that you generate from renewables, specifically from solar. And that is a vertical polygon system, which we mount solar panels vertically rather than horizontally. Now, why is that important? It's important because as an island, you don't have a lot of land space. And so when you're laying out PV systems, you are occupying quite a bit. And I was looking at a particular project where I think 4 or 5 megawatts of energy was generated in a 5-acre space. And we looked at that and thought, my goodness, that's a lot of land degradation. That's a lot of impact to the potential impact to the ecology of the country, right? And so we reached out and said, well, this is what we can do in terms of 1/5 of that space to generate twice as much power as you are doing. So I'm happy to get into that conversation. I know I'm speaking very fast because of the time, but I'm happy to get into that conversation and to talk about how we can get to energy independence in a shorter period of time, and we can involve all stakeholders actively, especially our young people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for racing through a wealth of very important points I think you're making, and a lot of which would warrant a lot more discussion. So maybe we're going away with this with some homework to have more of these types of exchange formats and you know, focus them around some of those key questions that you're raising. Given that we are actually now at kind of what was supposed to be the end of our time, I would like to ask you all to please bear with us, because we have one more very important input from the water sector. So with that, may I hand over to you, Ignatius, for your inputs, and apologies for pushing it that late in the session.
Well, good morning, everyone, and I'd like to thank Chris for throwing me into the deep end, and as water has always seemed to be in the deep end of things as an afterthought, but let's see that we are here. Water is life. Just to say that I think I would like to endorse some of what Mr. Jacks just said about capturing data, and I thought some excellent points. And on COVID-19, what it has done for us, and that we are able to utilize our human resources within the diaspora, and that we can save a lot. And I hope that a lot of the savings we have with not having to travel all these and have all these air miles can be translated into or converted and into actual funding for projects. Because if I often say that if you convert what it costs for hosting just one of these sessions, you just imagine if we had to fly to one of the Caribbean countries today for such a meeting. All of that money, I guess, I could train so many of my water operators for just one session of such meetings. So maybe that's a good way forward. Just to say that some of what, and I know we're up against time, that in terms of the data collection, that has been a nightmare around the region. And I think it is because we do not have a culture of sharing information, and maybe a lack of trust of doing that. But there's a lot that is going on within the water sector in particular. And many of the water utilities have been trying to improve the use of the technologies in terms of automating the system as much as possible, and having like systems there, the mapping of their systems using the supervisory control data acquisition system, SCADA, as well as the GIS systems and other forms of measuring the amount of metering the water systems, etc. So there's a lot of data that's being captured by the water utilities, and which would be useful for decision making. And I think one of the points Mr. Jacques mentioned that could be used is, I was just thinking that how could we use our young techies in maybe part of some of our planning to have them on board, and we can train them so that they could move into the utilities and mine a lot of that data to feed into the system for decision making. So that is a good point that was made, and I was thinking along those lines. But just to tell you some of what we have been doing as a collective, as the Caribbean Water and Sewage Association, alongside the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association, we are the Association of Water Utilities, and there's the Association of the Professionals, and they hold an annual conference which brings hundreds of participants. And one of the things that we have developed over the past 2 years was a regional strategic plan for governance and building climate resilience in the water sector in the Caribbean. And that has been presented in Jamaica to the high-level forum of water ministers. And it was again endorsed in Bastia in 2019, October. by the high-level forum of ministers. So what we've been doing is to look at some of the critical areas of, it's based on some 5 pillars of action: water sector governance, climate-informed decision support, climate resilience water resources management, climate resilient water service provision, and capacity building and public sensitization to build climate resilience. And of course, we have put up a plan of action. We have had support in doing this from agencies such as of course, the regional banks, the Caribbean Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank, as well as other partners such as the Pan American Health Organization and some of the UN agencies in putting this plan of action together. And so we would be looking for ways to include it in that plan, is to find ways to reduce water demand to acceptable levels, to adapt to climate-related water scarcity, and particularly targeting the reduction of non-revenue water, which is a big issue in the region and helps to reduce our, improve our energy efficiency. In that too regard, we also be looking at, because of our vulnerability to natural disasters, and as we speak, we are monitoring a hurricane that is, well, it's developing into a hurricane, and we are monitoring that now as we speak. But one of the things that we, with the support of the IDB Invest, they have undertaken a feasibility study on looking at a mutual insurance for the water utilities to help with the mitigation strategies. And of course, energy efficiency is critical. And I would not go into all the detail, but we have had in terms of water operator partnerships, and I think someone mentioned earlier about how we can do things regionally because of our size and our limited human resource and financial capacities. It is important that we can have the peer-to-peer relationships, that we can share a lot of the knowledge and all of the technical capacities that we have in the region. So that is a critical thing for us. We have been working with the Global Water Operators Partnerships Alliance of the UN Habitat, and of trying to help water utilities in partnering with each other in trying to meet some of those targets set. And one of these has been, for example, with the GIZ funded project in St. Lucia with WASCO, and where we have been able to bring in other utilities to partner in on this project, looking at the reduction of non-revenue water in St. Lucia. And there are several of the countries in the region that have undertaken similar exercises at a bigger scale, such as in Jamaica, with private sector relationships, as well as the reduction of or the inclusion of other partners in helping to train. And for example, out of Europe, we've had Hamburg WASA working with WASCO in St. Lucia, and it's helped in training in doing the energy audits and looking at the types of pumps that are used, that they are being more efficient, and also looking at options for using solar energy in the water systems wherever possible, because one of the big cost factors for operating water utilities is the high cost of energy. So I'm going to stop here for now.
Thank you so much, Ignatius. And I have a feeling we might have to continue this series, which we started originally with a session aimed at the private sector, with much more of a detailed discussion on some of the key sectors, what the companies are doing in the sectors, and maybe also indeed this nexus of the energy and water sector that you also mentioned there, Ignatius, just now. There's a direct question for you around the regional water strategy being available to be shared. Can you share it?
Yes, sure. I'm going to do that. I can do that promptly.
Great, thank you very much. And the other questions, I'm afraid we might have to respond to offline, Telly. Apologies for that. I see that most of our participants are still with us at this point, but I suspect the full hour will be the time when they may have other appointments. So with that, goodbye from me. Thank you very much to all our speakers. Thank you all of you for your patience as we went over time a bit. And over to you, Crispin, for your closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Lena. And I also want, before I give the final sign off, I just want to thank everyone who's joined this session today, but very importantly, just to thank our speakers, because it's the fact that we were able to assemble such a diverse and what I call a high-powered panel shows the importance of the event. And the fact also that we were able to do this, our private sector speakers were able to speak about water and energy. That was very, very useful because, well, every time we think of NDCs, we think of energy and we think of, cutting down emissions. But water is also critical because both energy and water are critical for all sectors, all economic sectors. And there's also the nexus of the energy-water nexus, because certainly in countries like St. Lucia, where I'm based and where I'm from, one of the heaviest users of electricity is the water sector, the water utility. And so if you're going to be talking water energy efficiency, then you have to be thinking about the cost of pumping water up, up and down the hills and valleys and so on. So this event has been really, really critical. I think it's been really successful. I'm very happy with the outcome, and I just want to say that in closing, we will be making the recording available, and so that you can listen in case there's any further, if you want to just glean any of the points that were made and that you may have forgotten. And also, if you want more information, you can reach out to the OECS Commission or to Annette, but you can reach me. I'm going to type my email in the chat right now, so that you can get that for so if you want to reach out for any additional information. So it's actually crunits@oecs.int. Okay, so it's, in other words, climate resilience, CDR unit, climate and disaster resilience unit at oecs.int. So with that, knowing that time is short, I want to thank you very, very much for your participation and looking forward to engaging in the future and seeing how we can move the climate agenda in the region forward. Thank you once again, everyone.
Chris, could I just say something before we disappear, please?
By all means.
So basically, thank you very much, Chris. My other colleagues, I didn't discuss that with them, but basically just on their behalf to say thank you to the OECS for convening this forum, and to all of the partners, and to you, Lena, for moderating this initiative. It has been quite a useful one, and in terms of being able to discuss and share. And having all the stakeholders that have been on, who are still on. I just want to let the partners know that indeed there's absolute need for the work that they're doing. So please do not stop. There will be challenges to the approach that is being developed and to the modalities for providing the support. But although there is indeed uniqueness in being small, there are indeed many, many challenges. And then oftentimes the things that are written on the aid memoirs and the agreement documents as needs and the formats that is required in they do not actually exist, and as is contemplated, and it requires pure magic and creativity to get them done. But please, please, please don't give up on us. Let us continue to engage and listen to the local counterparts, and the work to be accomplished will be undertaken. So just wanted to say that. So again, thank you very much, and goodbye, everybody.
Okay, thanks. So as a co-organizer, I get the last word, right? Chris, you can't have the last word.
Yeah, absolutely.
and Lena, you did a fantastic job as always. And partners, again, everyone. And I think that's the fact that the NDCFI has been being able to work with the World Bank and NDC partnership and everyone today to bring this forward, make this event happen. It shows what, and UNDP and everyone, it shows what the possibilities are. until when we work together. I think, as someone said earlier, there's a need for coordination, but with coordination, a lot can be done. And I mean, also not forget to thank Ventura right now, because the UNFCCC was one of the entities that helped us to get the NDCFI, the NDC Finance Initiative, running. And it's just a reminder that it operates under the auspices of the NDC partnership. So represented by Jakob. So Jakob, thanks again. And once again, thanks everyone.